Foreign policy was hijacked by some people that I think it's cruel but proper. General Zinni of the Marine Corps called them chicken hawks, war lovers, but who have no experience of either barracks life or of war, who are abstract enthusiasts for empire.
How many of these men, who are the neocon intellectuals, avoided military service when they had the chance, or when they were of draft age? They avoided it, but yet, of course, they're willing to send, blue-collar men, white working class, and men of color from the poor and working classes off to kill and die for their imperial ambitions. But they're sitting in their Tony offices in Washington and New York.
I'm an American first and foremost. I love my country more than anything. I'm willing to die for my country. I'm like George W. Bush, our president. Mr. Chicken Hawk, a guy who couldn't even have the courage to see through his tour of duty in the Air National Guard. Maybe flying F-102s over Houston, Texas was too dangerous, so he ran off to Alabama, while millions of Americans were going to Vietnam. And he has an administration chock full of these so-called heroes, people who didn't have the courage to defend their country in a time of unpopular war, and yet today they've got us engaged in another unpopular war, and they're asking other people to go out there and do things.
We call them chicken hawks because none of them served in the military. They didn't wear a uniform. They all had other things to do. None of their children serve in the military. So this is a double chicken hawk whammy here because, George Bush's daughters don't wear a uniform. It's funny, he says, my daughter's the same age as Jessica Lynch. Yeah, but there's a big difference. Jessica Lynch wore a uniform and did what you guys told him to do.
You say you're the leader of the free world because you have military experience, and we find out you've been AWOL. You didn't really show up. There are holes even in the stories you put forth in the media now to suggest I was there. Look, I have memories of it. I remember that I was there.
There isn't anyone who can stand up and say, I served with George W. Bush.
These records ought to have been noted by his commanding officers.
Some of his officers don't recall ever seeing him.
That's a simple question. How about a simple answer?
Bush was a draft dodger. Not only that, he was AWOL. In fact, he was a deserter, because if it's longer than 30 days, you're a deserter. The guy was actually a deserter in wartime. If it had been Clinton, they would have just crucified him on the White House lawn.
I was in Iraq when George Bush made the comment when he was talking about Iraqi attacks on U.S. soldiers, and he said, bring them on.
There are some who feel like that, the conditions are such that they can attack us there. My answer is bring them on.
And you should have seen the reaction among the troops when they heard that. They started saying, bring on the attacks. We're the ones who are out here on the streets doing patrol that are the targets. How could he be saying that? This can only be coming from people who never fought. He can dress himself up all he wants in this military gear and show up on aircrafts and present himself with a turkey in front of the troops. This guy never fought a war.
He's not qualified to speak of himself as macho, but he's shrewd enough to know that those working males out there are very angry, and that if he presents himself as macho, as he did, of course, with that ridiculous flight in the back seat of that fast plane to land on the carrier in full combat gear, if he presents himself that way, they'll buy it. They'll buy it because they need it.
Recent AP poll showed Mr. Bush leading his Democratic opponent, John Kerry, by almost 20% when it comes to white men.
On his visit to Ground Zero a few days after the catastrophe, he took the bullhorn and stood alongside some of the rescue workers and basically did the one thing he has always been undeniably good at, which is cheerleading. He was a cheerleader at Phillips Andover, actually, and very good at it. But this is the culture of TV, where the press really only cares about and only responds to televisual performance. And at a moment where everybody wanted a big daddy, Bush did well enough to allow the press to marvel at his aplomb, at his stature, and it became a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
If I had a little window into the average American household, like 5 minutes on their TV screen at night, to tell them how to decode the kind of propaganda they're going to see from President Bush about security, I think, I would say, first of all, don't just look at the images. Don't just look at Bush landing on the aircraft carrier, Bush surrounding himself with our troops.
Hooah! Semper Fi.
They want him to look tough. They want him to look strong. In fact, even on Earth Day, the image they chose was him with an axe in his hand, clearing trails in the Adirondacks. So, his administration is so dripping with testosterone that even to celebrate Earth Day, the guy's got to have a weapon in his hand.
They lose no opportunity to take pictures of Bush on the ranch, outdoors, not sitting at a desk, wearing, reading glasses and having, intellectual conversations, but out walking, clearing brush, sitting on the back of a pickup truck. Those images are plentiful, and that's not an accident. That's how they've understood Bush's popularity, is he is the rugged individualist. He is the cowboy.
The Republicans have ingeniously, created this sense that this is about real men. It's time for real men to step to the plate. Now, enough of this namby-pamby, because George W. represents the reborn American male.
Bush's propagandists have been masterful at crafting a certain image for him, actually based to some extent on his weaknesses. He's not a guy who was born in Connecticut and was a legacy admission to Phillips Andover and Yale. He's not a guy who has the Queen of England as a cousin, He's not a guy from a fabulously wealthy family. None of that is the case. He's just Will Rogers. He's just a regular guy, and when he messes up the language, it proves he's just like you and me.
I don't understand the emotionality of the death penalty.
U.S. Daily's story about subliminal messages.
Reduced power plant emissions. First time we may be completely certain he has nuclear weapons. Some accuse us both of not being able to speak the language.
That's quite brilliant, is to make Bush out to be a kind of Jacksonian figure, kind of natural leader from the wilds,
President Bush and his colleagues talk about a certain America to defend their policies. They think America still is back in the 19th century, where the tough guys can take out one another in an open combat, man against man, high noon on Main Street with Gary Cooper, being played by President Bush.
I want justice. And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive."
He's not Gary Cooper. He's a coward who bushwhacked the American people by exploiting the fear and ignorance engendered in the post-9/11 environment to portray Iraq as a threat to our national security, weapons of mass destruction that would destroy the very society that we live in. The need, therefore, for frontier justice to prevent mushroom clouds from popping up all over American cities. He lied to us. He bushwhacked us.
You think of past elections, Michael Dukakis, you think of him riding around in the tank looking like Snoopy, you think of the Willie Horton ad against him. You don't really think of substantive things because our elections rarely turn anymore on substantive issues. But this is one that really needs to be decided on the substance because our country faces real threats. But these guys are not going after the right threats. They are pursuing a pre-existing agenda under the guise of fighting terrorism that is going to bankrupt our country, that is going to put our troops at risk, and that is going to make the terrorist threat to us grow over time instead of diminish